In the autumn of 1887, when the Virginia countryside blazed with crimson and gold, a routine property survey would uncover one of the most systematic and horrifying family enterprises in American history. What federal marshals discovered beneath the seemingly respectable Whitworth estate would challenge everything the community of Millbrook thought they knew about their most beloved physician and his charitable family. Between 1872 and 1887, over 47 souls vanished without a trace, their bodies commodified and their lives erased by those they trusted most. What authorities tried to bury in sealed court records and hushed testimony can no longer remain hidden in the shadows of Virginia's dark past. Before we descend into this chilling tale of medical authority corrupted beyond recognition, this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history should continue. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these forgotten victims remain silent, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Let us know in the comments what state you're listening from and what time it is where you are. We're building a global community of people who believe these stories must be told, no matter how disturbing they may be. The Whitworth family arrived in Millbrook, Virginia in 1869, just 4 years after the Civil War had left the South in ruins. Dr. Edmund Whitworth presented himself as a godsend to the struggling community, a learned physician from Baltimore who had studied at prestigious medical colleges back east. His wife Margaret appeared to be the perfect complement to his professional standing, a woman of refinement and charity who immediately began organizing relief efforts for the town's most vulnerable residents. Their children, Thomas and Sarah, seemed destined to continue their parents' legacy of service and respectability. Dr. Whitworth established his medical practice in a grand Victorian home on Elm Street, the largest residence in Millbrook. The bottom floor served as his clinic and surgery, while the family occupied the upper floors. Behind the main house, he constructed what he called his research laboratory, a building he claimed was necessary for advancing medical knowledge in their isolated community. Few questioned the constant deliveries of supplies or the strange odors that occasionally drifted from the laboratory's chimney. After all, medical research was mysterious work, and Dr. Whitworth was bringing modern medicine to their backward town. The community embraced the Whitworth family with open arms. Dr. Edmund's medical expertise saved lives that would have been lost to infection, disease, and injury. His surgical skills were legendary, and patients traveled from neighboring counties to seek his treatment. Margaret Whitworth organized the Ladies' Charitable Society, which provided food and clothing to destitute families. Sarah, barely 16 when the family arrived, began volunteering at the Millbrook Orphanage, where her gentle nature and generous spirit endeared her to the abandoned children. Thomas, 2 years older than his sister, assisted his father in the medical practice, showing remarkable aptitude for surgical procedures despite his youth. What the good people of Millbrook could not have imagined was that the Whitworth family had not come to Virginia to escape the devastation of war, but to exploit it. Dr. Edmund Whitworth had indeed received medical training, but his credentials were partially fabricated, and his true expertise lay not in healing but in a far more sinister field of study. The family had fled Baltimore not to seek opportunity, but to escape growing suspicions about missing patients and unexplained deaths at the charity hospital where Dr. Whitworth had worked. The post-war South provided the perfect environment for their enterprise. Records were incomplete, authorities were overwhelmed, and desperate people were willing to trust anyone who offered hope. The constant movement of displaced populations meant that missing persons often went unnoticed for months or even years. Federal oversight was minimal, and local law enforcement was either corrupt or simply too understaffed to investigate thoroughly. The Whitworth family had found their ideal hunting ground. Dr. Whitworth's medical practice served as the perfect cover for identifying suitable victims. Patients who came to his clinic alone, who had no family connections in the area, who possessed property or savings that could be acquired through forged documents. He developed an uncanny ability to assess not just their medical conditions, but their social vulnerability. Those who fit his criteria received special attention, extended treatment plans that required multiple visits, and experimental procedures that he claimed would revolutionize medicine. Margaret Whitworth proved to be an equally valuable partner in their enterprise. Her charitable work gave her access to detailed information about every family in Millbrook and the surrounding area. She knew which households were struggling financially, which children had no parents, which elderly residents had no relatives to check on them. Her position as head of the Ladies' Charitable Society made her the repository of the community's most intimate secrets and vulnerabilities. Sarah's work at the orphanage provided access to the most defenseless victims of all. Children who had already been abandoned by the world, who had no one to notice if they disappeared, who trusted the kind young woman who brought them treats and told them stories. Sarah would identify the children who were most isolated, most likely to be overlooked if they vanished. She would befriend them, gain their trust, and then arrange for them to receive special medical attention from her father. Thomas's role in the family business was perhaps the most crucial of all. His surgical skills surpassed even those of his father, and his youth made him particularly effective at gaining the trust of vulnerable patients. He had been trained not just in legitimate medical procedures, but in the specialized techniques their enterprise required. His steady hands and cold efficiency made him an invaluable asset to the family's operations. The Whitworth family's success depended on maintaining their reputation as pillars of the community while systematically identifying and eliminating those who would not be missed. They understood that their survival required not just the ability to kill, but the intelligence to select victims whose disappearances would raise no alarms. They had turned murder into a science, with each family member playing a carefully orchestrated role in their deadly symphony. As 1872 dawned, the Whitworth family felt confident that they had found their permanent home in Millbrook. The community trusted them completely, their victim selection process had been refined to perfection, and their disposal methods had proven entirely effective. They had no way of knowing that their 15-year reign of terror was about to begin, or that their names would eventually be whispered in horror throughout Virginia and beyond. The first victim whose disappearance would later be documented was a traveling merchant named Joseph Hartwell, who arrived in Millbrook in March of 1872 complaining of severe stomach pains. He sought treatment from Dr. Whitworth and was never seen alive again. His wagon and goods were discovered abandoned on the outskirts of town, leading authorities to assume he had been robbed and murdered by highway bandits. No one connected his disappearance to the respected physician who had treated him, or to the family that had welcomed him so warmly into their community of trust and charity. The success of the Joseph Hartwell operation convinced Dr. Edmund Whitworth that Millbrook would provide everything his family needed to expand their enterprise beyond anything they had attempted in Baltimore. The traveling merchant's disappearance had been attributed to common highway robbery, exactly as the doctor had anticipated. Local authorities showed no interest in investigating further, and the community's trust in the Whitworth family remained absolute. This validation of their methods marked the beginning of what would become the most systematic family murder operation in Virginia history. Dr. Whitworth had learned from his mistakes in Baltimore, where his eagerness had nearly exposed the family's activities. In Maryland, he had been too aggressive, too obvious in his victim selection. Patients had disappeared too frequently from his charity hospital ward, and suspicious colleagues had begun asking uncomfortable questions. The family's hasty departure from Baltimore had taught them valuable lessons about patience, discretion, and the importance of maintaining community trust above all else. The doctor spent the summer of 1872 carefully studying Millbrook's social dynamics and identifying the town's most vulnerable populations. He discovered that the community's isolation worked in his favor. People disappeared regularly due to the dangerous roads, wild animals, disease, and simple decisions to seek better opportunities elsewhere. The town had grown accustomed to unexplained departures, making it the perfect environment for their operations. Margaret Whitworth used her charitable work to compile detailed profiles of potential victims. Through the Ladies' Charitable Society, she gained access to every household's financial situation, family connections, and personal struggles. She learned which families owed money they could never repay, which elderly residents had accumulated modest savings with no heirs, which widows owned property that could be easily transferred through forged documents. Her charity work provided the perfect cover for gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable to their family business. Sarah's role at the orphanage evolved throughout 1872 as she identified which children would be most suitable for their purposes. She learned that the youngest orphans, those under 8 years old, were rarely adopted and had no memory of life before the institution. These children could disappear without generating significant investigation, especially if their disappearance was attributed to illness or accidental death. Sarah developed a system for befriending these vulnerable children, gaining their trust, and preparing them for what she told them would be special medical treatment from her father. Thomas proved to be remarkably adaptable to the family's expanded operations. His medical training progressed rapidly under his father's guidance, but his education extended far beyond conventional medicine. Dr. Whitworth taught his son specialized techniques that would be essential to their business, including methods for inducing death that would appear natural, procedures for harvesting valuable body parts, and techniques for preserving specimens for transportation to buyers in larger cities. The family's laboratory behind the main house underwent significant expansion during the summer of 1872. Dr. Whitworth claimed that his research required additional space and equipment, and the community was impressed by his dedication to advancing medical knowledge. What they could not see was the construction of specialized rooms designed for their true purposes, examination areas where victims could be processed, preservation facilities for preparing body parts for sale, and disposal systems for eliminating evidence. By autumn of 1872, the Whitworth family had established relationships with buyers throughout Virginia and neighboring states. Medical schools paid premium prices for fresh specimens, especially those from healthy young adults. Private collectors sought unusual specimens for their personal studies. Underground networks of physicians and researchers provided steady demand for the family's products. The post-war shortage of medical cadavers made their business extremely profitable. The family's victim selection criteria became increasingly sophisticated throughout their first year in Millbrook. They learned to identify individuals who possessed 3 crucial characteristics: social isolation, modest financial assets, and physical suitability for their buyers' requirements. Dr. Whitworth developed psychological profiles that helped him predict which patients would be most trusting, most likely to follow his medical recommendations without question, and least likely to be missed if they disappeared. Their first systematic operation after Joseph Hartwell involved an elderly woman named Agnes Morrison, who came to Dr. Whitworth seeking treatment for persistent cough and chest pain. Agnes lived alone in a small cottage outside town, had no surviving family members, and owned her property outright. Margaret Whitworth had learned through her charitable work that Agnes kept her life savings hidden in her home and had never made a will. The woman's isolated lifestyle made her an ideal candidate for their purposes. Dr. Whitworth prescribed a series of treatments that required Agnes to visit his clinic regularly over several weeks. During these visits, he gained her complete trust while forging documents that would transfer her property to the family after her death. When Agnes Morrison disappeared in November of 1872, the official record showed that she had died of natural causes during treatment and had willed her estate to Dr. Whitworth in gratitude for his medical care. Her body was never found, and no one questioned the convenient timing of her death or the suspicious nature of her will. The success of the Agnes Morrison operation established the template that the Whitworth family would follow for the next 15 years. They had perfected a system that combined medical authority, charitable reputation, legal document forgery, and body disposal into a seamless process that generated substantial profits while maintaining complete community trust. Their enterprise had evolved from opportunistic murder into a sophisticated business operation that would ultimately claim dozens of lives while enriching the family beyond their wildest expectations. The winter of 1872 brought unprecedented prosperity to the Whitworth family as their refined methods generated steady profits from their deadly enterprise. Dr. Edmund had established regular correspondence with buyers throughout the Southeast, medical schools that paid premium prices for fresh cadavers, and private collectors who sought specific anatomical specimens for their personal research. The family's laboratory operated at full capacity, processing victims with industrial efficiency while maintaining the facade of legitimate medical research. Thomas Whitworth had become his father's most valuable asset, demonstrating surgical skills that surpassed even experienced physicians twice his age. The young man showed no emotional reaction to their work, approaching each victim with clinical detachment that impressed even his hardened father. Thomas had developed specialized techniques for harvesting organs and body parts while preserving their quality for transportation, skills that commanded premium prices from their buyers throughout Virginia and beyond. The family's victim processing had evolved into a precise science by early 1873. Dr. Whitworth would identify suitable candidates through his medical practice, individuals who met their criteria for social isolation, financial assets, and physical desirability. Margaret would conduct background research through her charitable work, confirming that the potential victim had no family connections or social ties that would generate investigation if they disappeared. Sarah would establish personal relationships with selected victims, gaining their trust and affection to ensure compliance with treatment recommendations. Their operational security had been refined through careful observation of community reactions to previous disappearances. The family learned that deaths attributed to natural causes during medical treatment generated no suspicion, especially when the deceased had no surviving family members to question the circumstances. Forged wills and property transfers appeared routine when handled by respected community members, and the town's isolation meant that outside authorities rarely investigated local affairs. The Whitworth family's laboratory had been expanded to include specialized facilities for every aspect of their operation. The basement contained examination rooms where victims received their final treatments, preservation chambers where bodies were prepared for sale, and disposal systems for eliminating evidence that could not be sold. The upper floors housed legitimate medical equipment that provided cover for their activities, while secret passages allowed discreet movement of victims and products without observation from the community. By spring of 1873, the family had established a network of corrupt officials who facilitated their operations in exchange for substantial payments. Sheriff William Crane had been recruited after Margaret Whitworth discovered his gambling debts and threatened financial ruin. The local funeral director, Marcus Webb, provided official death certificates and burial records for victims who had supposedly died of natural causes. County Clerk Benjamin Hayes falsified property records and legal documents, ensuring that victim assets transferred smoothly to the Whitworth family. Their victim selection process had become increasingly sophisticated as the family learned to identify individuals who possessed optimal combinations of vulnerability and value. Traveling merchants carried substantial cash and valuable goods while having no local connections to investigate their disappearance. Elderly residents with accumulated savings but no surviving family members provided both immediate profit and property acquisition opportunities. Young adults in good physical condition commanded premium prices from medical schools seeking quality specimens for anatomical study. The family's most profitable operation during this period involved a wealthy widow named Catherine Brennan, who sought treatment for persistent headaches that prevented her from managing her late husband's prosperous general store. Mrs. Brennan had inherited substantial property and savings but had no children or close relatives, making her an ideal candidate for their purposes. Dr. Whitworth prescribed an extended treatment regimen that required weekly visits to his clinic over several months. During Catherine Brennan's treatment period, Margaret Whitworth befriended the lonely widow through charitable work, learning intimate details about her financial situation and personal history. Sarah visited Mrs. Brennan regularly, providing companionship and assistance with household tasks while gaining access to important documents and financial records. Thomas assisted with her medical treatments, establishing the trust that would prove crucial to their ultimate success. Dr. Whitworth gradually increased Mrs. Brennan's medication dosages while forging documents that would transfer her business and property to his family upon her death. The process required careful timing to ensure that her mental capacity appeared diminished when she signed the fraudulent papers, but not so compromised that the documents would be questioned by authorities. Her death in August of 1873 appeared to result from the progression of her medical condition, and her will naming Dr. Whitworth as primary beneficiary was accepted without question. The Catherine Brennan operation generated more profit than all their previous activities combined, providing the family with sufficient capital to expand their enterprise significantly. They acquired additional property for their operations, purchased advanced medical equipment that enhanced their processing capabilities, and established new relationships with buyers who paid premium prices for their products. The success convinced Dr. Whitworth that their methods had been perfected and their risks minimized to acceptable levels. Their confidence was further bolstered by the community's continued trust and admiration. Dr. Whitworth's medical reputation had grown throughout the region, attracting patients from distant counties who sought his expertise. Margaret's charitable work had expanded to neighboring communities, providing intelligence about potential victims across a wider geographic area. Sarah's volunteer work at multiple orphanages gave her access to vulnerable children throughout central Virginia. Thomas's medical skills had developed to the point where he could operate independently, effectively doubling their processing capacity. By autumn of 1873, the Whitworth family had eliminated 12 victims while maintaining absolute community trust and generating substantial profits from their enterprise. They had refined their methods to eliminate virtually all risk of detection, established secure relationships with buyers and corrupt officials, and created operational systems that could be expanded indefinitely. Their success had convinced them that they had achieved the perfect balance between profitability and security, setting the stage for the systematic expansion that would define the next phase of their deadly operations. The year 1874 marked a turning point in the Whitworth family's operations as they began systematically targeting the most vulnerable members of society with unprecedented efficiency. Dr. Edmund had developed what he privately called his selection matrix, a methodical approach to identifying victims who offered maximum profit with minimum risk. The system evaluated potential targets based on social isolation, financial assets, physical condition, and likelihood of generating investigation if they disappeared. This scientific approach to murder would allow the family to accelerate their operations while maintaining their pristine reputation. The family's victim categories had expanded beyond their original focus on isolated individuals to include specific demographic groups that provided optimal returns on their investment of time and resources. Orphan children commanded premium prices from buyers who sought young specimens for anatomical study, while their disappearances could be easily attributed to illness or accidental death. Elderly residents with accumulated wealth but no surviving family members provided both immediate financial gain and property acquisition opportunities that funded future operations. Thomas Whitworth had assumed increasing responsibility for the family's operational activities, demonstrating leadership qualities that impressed even his calculating father. The young man had developed innovative processing techniques that improved the quality of their products while reducing the time required for each operation. His surgical precision and emotional detachment made him ideally suited for the family business, and his youthful appearance helped gain the trust of victims who might be suspicious of his father's intentions. Sarah's role in the enterprise had evolved from simple victim identification to sophisticated psychological manipulation that ensured complete compliance from their targets. She had mastered the art of befriending lonely individuals, providing them with companionship and emotional support that made them dependent on her affection. Her work with orphan children had taught her how to exploit vulnerability and desperation, skills that proved invaluable when applied to adult victims who craved human connection. The family's operational base had undergone significant expansion to accommodate their increased activity levels. The laboratory complex now included multiple processing rooms that allowed simultaneous operations, advanced preservation facilities that maintained product quality during transportation, and secure storage areas for valuable specimens awaiting shipment to buyers. Underground tunnels connected various buildings on their property, providing discreet movement of victims and products without risk of observation from the community. Dr. Whitworth's medical practice had become a sophisticated screening operation that identified potential victims while maintaining his reputation as the region's most skilled physician. He had learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated social isolation, financial vulnerability, and psychological susceptibility to manipulation. His diagnostic interviews gathered intelligence about family connections, personal relationships, and financial resources that determined whether patients would receive legitimate treatment or become candidates for elimination. The family's network of corrupt officials had expanded to include key figures throughout the county government, ensuring that their operations received protection from potential investigation. Judge Harrison Mills had been compromised through evidence of his illegal gambling activities and now provided legal cover for property transfers and estate settlements. Tax assessor Robert Hayes falsified records to conceal the family's rapidly growing wealth, while postal clerk Samuel Brooks intercepted correspondence that might generate unwanted attention from outside authorities. Their victim processing schedule had been systematized to maintain steady production levels while avoiding patterns that might generate suspicion. The family eliminated one victim per month during peak seasons, reducing activity during winter months when travel was difficult and missing persons reports were more likely to be investigated. This calculated approach allowed them to maintain their elimination rate while ensuring that disappearances appeared random rather than systematic. The Whitworth family's most ambitious operation during this period involved simultaneous targeting of 3 orphan siblings who had been placed in Sarah's care at the Millbrook Orphanage. The children, ages 6, 8, and 10, had no living relatives and had been abandoned at the institution after their parents died in a house fire. Sarah had spent months gaining their trust and affection, convincing them that Dr. Whitworth would provide special medical treatment that would help them find new families. The elimination of the orphan siblings required careful coordination between all family members to ensure that their disappearances would not generate investigation. Sarah arranged for the children to be taken from the orphanage for what she described as routine medical examinations, while Margaret prepared forged documents indicating that the children had been placed with families in distant counties. Thomas assisted with the processing operations, and Dr. Whitworth handled the disposal of evidence and distribution of products to buyers. The success of the orphan operation convinced the family that their methods had reached maximum efficiency and that they could accelerate their activities without increasing their risk of detection. The children's disappearance was attributed to successful adoptions, and the orphanage staff praised Sarah's dedication to finding homes for the most difficult cases. No investigation was conducted, and no outside authorities questioned the convenient timing of the adoptions. Dr. Whitworth's confidence in their operational security led him to establish relationships with buyers in more distant markets, including medical schools in Philadelphia and private collectors in Washington. These expanded business relationships increased their profits substantially while providing additional security through geographic diversification. The family's reputation for providing high-quality specimens had spread throughout the underground network of body traders, ensuring steady demand for their products. By the end of 1874, the Whitworth family had eliminated 21 victims while accumulating wealth that exceeded their most optimistic projections. Their operational systems had been refined to achieve maximum efficiency with minimum risk. Their network of corrupt officials provided comprehensive protection from investigation, and their reputation in the community remained unblemished. They had transformed murder into a profitable business enterprise that seemed capable of indefinite expansion, setting the stage for the peak operational period that would define their legacy of systematic terror. The years 1875 through 1878 would later be remembered as the peak of the Whitworth family's reign of terror, a period when their operations reached industrial scale while their reputation in the community achieved legendary status. Dr. Edmund Whitworth had been elected to the county medical board. Margaret served as president of 3 different charitable organizations. Sarah had been appointed head supervisor at the regional orphanage system, and Thomas had established his own medical practice in the neighboring town of Cedar Falls. Their influence extended throughout central Virginia, providing unprecedented access to vulnerable populations across multiple communities. The family's operational network had expanded to include affiliated operations in 4 different counties, each managed by trusted associates who had been carefully recruited and trained in their methods. These satellite operations provided additional victim sources while creating geographic separation that reduced the risk of pattern recognition by law enforcement authorities. The Whitworth family had essentially franchised their murder enterprise, collecting profits from affiliated operations while maintaining operational control through their superior expertise and established buyer relationships. If this story is sending chills down your spine, you're not alone in recognizing the terrifying efficiency of this family's operations. Share this video with friends who appreciate dark historical mysteries, and hit that like button to support our efforts to bring these forgotten crimes to light. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into America's most disturbing family secrets. The deeper we dig into the Whitworth story, the more horrifying it becomes. Dr. Whitworth's medical reputation had grown to national prominence by 1876, when he published research papers describing innovative surgical techniques that were actually based on procedures he had developed while processing victims. His work was praised by medical institutions throughout the country, and he received invitations to speak at prestigious conferences where he shared knowledge gained through systematic human experimentation. The medical establishment's validation of his expertise provided perfect cover for his continued access to vulnerable patients seeking treatment from a renowned physician. The family's victim processing capabilities had been expanded to handle multiple operations simultaneously, with their laboratory complex operating around the clock during peak periods. They had perfected preservation and transportation methods that maintained product quality during shipment to distant buyers, while their packaging and documentation systems ensured that deliveries appeared to be legitimate medical supplies. The business had grown so sophisticated that they employed several full-time assistants who believed they were working for a legitimate medical supply company. Thomas Whitworth's independent practice in Cedar Falls had become a hunting ground for victims throughout the eastern part of the region, while his father continued operations in Millbrook and surrounding areas. The younger physician had developed his own network of corrupt officials and business associates, effectively doubling the family's operational capacity. His clinic specialized in treating patients with chronic conditions that required extended treatment periods, providing optimal opportunities for victim assessment and selection. Sarah's position as head supervisor of the regional orphanage system gave her administrative control over hundreds of vulnerable children across multiple institutions. She had implemented new policies that allowed for easier transfer of children between facilities, creating opportunities for selected victims to disappear without generating investigation. Her reputation as a dedicated child advocate provided perfect cover for activities that resulted in the systematic elimination of the most isolated and unwanted orphans under her care. The family's financial success had reached extraordinary levels by 1877, with their legitimate businesses providing cover for wealth that exceeded anything possible through conventional medical practice. They had invested in multiple properties, established several front companies, and created complex financial arrangements that concealed the true sources of their income. Their prosperity was attributed to Dr. Whitworth's medical genius and the family's business acumen, generating admiration rather than suspicion from their community. Their victim selection had become increasingly sophisticated, targeting individuals who possess specific characteristics required by their growing list of specialized buyers. Medical schools sought specimens with particular anatomical features for teaching purposes, while private collectors paid premium prices for unusual conditions or physical abnormalities. The family maintained detailed records of buyer preferences and victim characteristics, allowing them to match supply with demand for maximum profitability. The Whitworth family's most profitable period involved a systematic operation targeting wealthy patients who sought Dr. Whitworth's specialized treatments for various ailments. These individuals were carefully selected based on their financial assets, social isolation, and medical conditions that provided plausible explanations for sudden death. The family had developed protocols for processing these high-value victims while ensuring that their estates transferred smoothly to predetermined beneficiaries through forged legal documents. Their operational security had been enhanced through the recruitment of additional corrupt officials at the state level, including legislators who ensured that laws governing medical practice and death investigations remained favorable to their activities. These political connections provided protection from potential federal investigation while creating opportunities for expansion into new territories. The family's influence had grown to the point where they could operate with virtual impunity throughout Virginia and neighboring states. By 1878, the Whitworth family had eliminated over 40 victims while establishing themselves as pillars of Virginia society whose contributions to medicine and charity were celebrated throughout the region. Their success had convinced them that their enterprise was virtually undetectable and that they could continue operations indefinitely without significant risk. They had created what appeared to be the perfect crime family, combining medical authority, charitable reputation, political influence, and operational expertise into an unstoppable force that generated enormous profits while maintaining absolute community trust and admiration. The first serious threat to the Whitworth family's operations emerged in the spring of 1879, when a traveling journalist named Marcus Thornfield arrived in Millbrook to investigate reports of unusual disappearances throughout central Virginia. Thornfield had been commissioned by a Richmond newspaper to write a series of articles about missing persons in rural communities, and his preliminary research had identified disturbing patterns that seemed to center around areas where the Whitworth family operated. His arrival in Millbrook represented the most dangerous challenge the family had faced since establishing their enterprise 7 years earlier. Dr. Whitworth learned of Thornfield's investigation through Sheriff Crane, who had been approached by the journalist seeking information about missing persons reports and unexplained deaths in the county. The sheriff's warning gave the family sufficient time to implement emergency security measures they had developed for exactly such situations. All evidence of their activities was immediately concealed or destroyed, while family members began spreading carefully crafted stories that would discredit any allegations the journalists might make against them. Margaret Whitworth orchestrated a campaign to portray Thornfield as a disreputable character whose investigation was motivated by sensationalism rather than genuine concern for missing persons. She used her extensive network of charitable associates to spread rumors about the journalist's personal life, financial difficulties, and previous controversies, effectively destroying his credibility before he could publish any allegations against the family. Her social influence proved more effective than any direct confrontation in neutralizing the threat he represented. The family's response to the Thornfield investigation revealed the sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities they had developed over years of successful operations. Thomas had been assigned responsibility for monitoring potential threats to their security, and his network of informants throughout the region provided early warning of any suspicious activities or investigations. These security measures had prevented several previous threats from developing into serious challenges to their operations. Sarah's role in managing the Thornfield crisis demonstrated her ability to manipulate public opinion through her reputation as a dedicated child advocate. She organized community meetings where she discussed the importance of protecting vulnerable children from exploitation by unscrupulous journalists seeking sensational stories. Her emotional appeals generated widespread support for the family while portraying Thornfield as a threat to the very people he claimed to be helping through his investigation. The family's most serious security challenge occurred when Thornfield began interviewing relatives of missing persons who had last been seen seeking treatment from Dr. Whitworth. Several family members had traveled to Millbrook from distant locations to inquire about their missing relatives, and their stories created a pattern that could have exposed the family's activities if properly investigated. The situation required immediate action to prevent these witnesses from communicating with each other or with outside authorities. Dr. Whitworth implemented emergency protocols that had been developed for eliminating witnesses who posed existential threats to their operations. The relatives who had come to Millbrook seeking information about their missing family members were systematically targeted for elimination, with their deaths arranged to appear accidental or resulting from natural causes. These operations required precise coordination and flawless execution to avoid generating additional suspicion or investigation. The elimination of potential witnesses demonstrated the family's willingness to take extreme measures to protect their enterprise, even when such actions increased their operational risks. Thomas personally handled several of these emergency operations, demonstrating surgical precision and emotional detachment that impressed even his experienced father. The young physician had evolved into a cold-blooded killer whose skills exceeded those of any other family member. Margaret's intelligence network provided crucial information about Thornfield's investigation methods and sources, allowing the family to stay one step ahead of his inquiries. She learned that the journalist was planning to interview officials in neighboring counties where similar disappearances had occurred, information that allowed the family to warn their affiliated operations and coordinate defensive measures across their entire network. This intelligence proved invaluable in containing the threat before it could spread beyond their control. The family's response to the crisis also revealed their ability to manipulate law enforcement through their network of corrupt officials. Sheriff Crane arrested Thornfield on fabricated charges of public intoxication and disturbing the peace, while Judge Mills ensured that the journalist was held in jail long enough for the family to complete their evidence destruction and witness elimination operations. These actions effectively ended the investigation while maintaining the appearance of legitimate law enforcement activity. Sarah's elimination of potential witnesses among the orphan children under her supervision demonstrated the family's ruthless commitment to protecting their secrets. Several older children at the orphanage had begun asking questions about missing friends who had supposedly been adopted by distant families, questions that could have led to dangerous revelations if not properly managed. These children were systematically eliminated through medical procedures that appeared to treat legitimate illnesses. The Thornfield crisis taught the family valuable lessons about operational security that they incorporated into their standard procedures for future operations. They developed more sophisticated methods for monitoring potential threats, established better communication systems between their affiliated operations, and created more effective cover stories for their activities. These improvements strengthened their security while allowing them to continue their profitable enterprise with reduced risk of detection. By the end of 1879, the family had successfully neutralized the Thornfield investigation while eliminating 7 additional witnesses who had posed threats to their security. The journalist's disappearance was attributed to his decision to abandon his investigation and leave Virginia, while the deaths of potential witnesses were explained through various medical and accidental causes that generated no suspicion. The family's reputation remained intact, and their operations continued without interruption, having survived their most serious challenge through careful planning and ruthless execution. The success in eliminating the Thornfield threat had given the Whitworth family a dangerous sense of invincibility, but by 1880, new challenges were emerging that would prove far more difficult to manage than a single investigative journalist. Federal Marshal David Harrison had been assigned to investigate a series of interstate commerce violations related to illegal transportation of medical specimens, and his methodical approach to gathering evidence posed a fundamentally different threat than anything the family had previously encountered. Unlike local officials who could be corrupted or intimidated, Harrison represented federal authority with resources and jurisdiction that extended far beyond Virginia's borders. The Marshal's investigation had begun with routine inquiries about suspicious shipments that had been intercepted at various railroad stations throughout the Southeast. These shipments contained human remains that lacked proper documentation, leading to questions about their origins and destinations. Harrison's background in tracking organized criminal enterprises made him uniquely qualified to recognize patterns that local authorities had missed, and his investigation was already connecting activities across multiple states where the Whitworth family operated. If you're finding this investigation as fascinating and terrifying as we are, this is exactly the kind of deep historical research that takes countless hours to uncover and verify. Share this video with anyone who appreciates true crime history, and make sure to hit that like button to support our work bringing these buried stories to light. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell because the Whitworth story is about to take some incredible turns that you won't want to miss. Dr. Whitworth learned of Harrison's investigation through his network of buyers, several of whom had been questioned about the origins of specimens they had purchased from the family. These buyers reported that the marshal was asking detailed questions about shipping methods, documentation procedures, and supplier relationships that suggested a comprehensive understanding of the illegal body trade. The federal investigation represented an existential threat that required immediate and decisive action to protect the family's enterprise. The family's first response to the Harrison investigation involved attempts to gather intelligence about the marshal's methods, timeline, and evidence through their established network of informants. However, they quickly discovered that federal investigations operated under different rules than local inquiries, with security measures that made it extremely difficult to obtain advance warning of planned activities. This lack of intelligence created unprecedented uncertainty about the scope and direction of the threat they faced. Thomas Whitworth was assigned responsibility for developing contingency plans that would allow the family to continue operations even if their primary facilities were compromised by federal investigation. He began establishing backup locations in remote areas where processing activities could be relocated on short notice, while also creating alternative transportation and distribution networks that would be harder for authorities to trace. These preparations demonstrated the family's commitment to preserving their enterprise regardless of the risks involved. Sarah's position in the orphanage system became increasingly valuable as the family realized that institutional victims were less likely to generate federal attention than private individuals whose disappearances might be connected to interstate commerce violations. She began accelerating the elimination of orphan children under her supervision, using medical procedures that appeared legitimate while providing products for buyers who were still willing to purchase specimens despite the ongoing investigation. The family's network of corrupt local officials proved inadequate for managing a federal investigation, forcing them to seek protection at higher levels of government. Dr. Whitworth used his medical reputation and political connections to establish relationships with state legislators who might be able to influence federal investigative priorities. These efforts required substantial financial investments and created new vulnerabilities that increased their exposure to potential blackmail or betrayal. Margaret Whitworth's intelligence gathering revealed that Marshal Harrison was planning to visit Millbrook as part of his investigation, information that created panic within the family about their ability to maintain operational security under direct federal scrutiny. They began implementing emergency protocols that involved destroying evidence, relocating equipment, and preparing cover stories that would explain any suspicious activities the marshal might discover during his visit to their community. The family's desperation led them to consider eliminating Marshal Harrison directly, but they quickly realized that murdering a federal official would guarantee massive investigation that would destroy their operations regardless of their ability to conceal the crime. This realization forced them to develop more subtle strategies for managing the threat, including attempts to misdirect the investigation toward other suspects and regions where they had no operational interests. Dr. Whitworth's reputation in the medical community became both a liability and an asset during this crisis period. His prominence made him a likely target for federal investigation, but it also provided him with influential allies who could vouch for his character and professional integrity. He began cultivating relationships with respected physicians and medical institutions that might support him if accusations were made against his practice or research activities. The stress of managing multiple threats simultaneously began to create tensions within the family that had not existed during their years of unchallenged success. Thomas advocated for aggressive action against anyone who posed threats to their operations, while Sarah preferred more subtle manipulation of public opinion and official investigations. Margaret focused on gathering intelligence and maintaining their network of supporters, while Dr. Whitworth struggled to coordinate their responses while preserving their community reputation. By late 1880, the family faced the most dangerous period of their criminal career, with federal investigation closing in while local pressures continued to mount from various sources. Their ability to continue operations depended on successfully managing threats they could not eliminate through their traditional methods of corruption and violence. The systematic approach that had made them so successful was now being challenged by investigators who possessed superior resources, broader jurisdiction, and investigative techniques that the family had never encountered before. Marshal Harrison's arrival in Millbrook during the winter of 1881 marked the beginning of the end for the Whitworth family's reign of terror. The federal investigator brought with him a team of specialists who possessed forensic capabilities that far exceeded anything available to local authorities, including experts in document analysis, medical examination, and criminal pattern recognition. Their systematic approach to gathering evidence would prove devastatingly effective against a family that had grown overconfident in their ability to manipulate local investigations through corruption and intimidation. The Marshal's first breakthrough came when his document analysts examined property transfer records maintained by the county clerk's office. Despite Benjamin Hayes's efforts to create convincing forgeries, federal experts quickly identified numerous irregularities in handwriting, paper quality, and legal terminology that indicated systematic fraud spanning nearly a decade. These discoveries provided concrete evidence of criminal activity while establishing timelines that correlated with missing persons reports from throughout the region. Dr. Whitworth's initial confidence in his ability to charm federal investigators proved misplaced when Harrison demonstrated detailed knowledge of medical procedures and anatomical commerce that rivaled the physician's own expertise. The Marshal had prepared for his investigation by consulting with leading medical experts who helped him understand the technical aspects of body trafficking and specimen preparation. This preparation allowed him to ask informed questions that revealed inconsistencies in Dr. Whitworth's explanations of his research activities and business relationships. The family's most devastating setback occurred when Harrison's team discovered the laboratory complex behind the Whitworth residence during a routine survey of the property. Despite their efforts to conceal evidence of their activities, forensic experts found traces of human blood, bone fragments, and chemical residues that indicated systematic processing of human remains. Advanced scientific techniques unavailable to local authorities allowed federal investigators to identify these materials definitively, providing physical evidence that could not be explained through legitimate medical research. Thomas Whitworth's independent practice in Cedar Falls became a liability when Harrison's investigation expanded to include all facilities operated by family members. The younger physician had been less careful about concealing evidence than his father, and federal investigators found substantial proof of illegal activities at his clinic. These discoveries included preserved specimens, surgical instruments designed for non-medical purposes, and correspondence with buyers that documented the commercial nature of their operations. The emergence of a key witness proved catastrophic for the family's attempts to maintain their innocence. Dr. James Mitchell, a former colleague of Dr. Whitworth from Baltimore, came forward with information about suspicious activities he had observed before the family's departure from Maryland. Mitchell's testimony provided crucial background information that explained the family's motivations for relocating to Virginia while documenting previous patterns of behavior that supported federal allegations about their criminal enterprise. Margaret Whitworth's charitable activities became evidence against the family when investigators discovered that her detailed records of community members had been used to identify vulnerable victims. Her meticulous documentation of personal finances, family relationships, and social connections created a comprehensive database that federal agents recognized as a victim selection system. These records provided investigators with insights into the family's operational methods while identifying potential victims whose disappearances had not been properly investigated. Sarah's position in the orphanage system became untenable when Harrison's team began interviewing surviving children who had witnessed suspicious activities involving their missing friends. Several older orphans provided testimony about children who had been taken for medical treatment by Sarah and Dr. Whitworth but never returned to the institution. These witness accounts corroborated federal suspicions about systematic targeting of vulnerable children while providing specific details about the family's operational methods. The family's network of corrupt officials began to unravel as federal pressure intensified and self-preservation instincts overcame loyalty to their criminal associates. Sheriff Crane was the first to break under interrogation, providing detailed information about his role in covering up disappearances and falsifying official reports. His confession implicated other local officials while documenting the scope of corruption that had protected the Whitworth family's operations for over a decade. Judge Mills's attempts to maintain his innocence collapsed when federal investigators presented evidence of forged legal documents bearing his signature and seal. Faced with overwhelming proof of his complicity in property fraud and estate manipulation, the judge agreed to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony provided crucial insights into the legal mechanisms the family had used to profit from their victims' deaths while avoiding investigation. Dr. Whitworth's desperation led him to attempt bribing federal investigators, an action that confirmed their suspicions about his guilt while providing additional criminal charges that could be used to pressure him into confession. Harrison had anticipated such attempts and used recording devices to document the bribery offer, creating irrefutable evidence of the physician's criminal intent. This tactical error demonstrated how the family's traditional methods had become counterproductive when applied to federal law enforcement. The discovery of detailed financial records in the family's residence revealed the extraordinary profits they had generated through their criminal enterprise. Federal accountants calculated that the Whitworth family had accumulated wealth equivalent to millions of dollars in modern currency through their systematic murder and body trafficking operations. These financial records provided additional evidence of criminal activity while documenting the commercial scale of their enterprise. Margaret Whitworth's attempt to destroy evidence during the federal investigation resulted in additional charges while failing to eliminate the most damaging materials that investigators had already secured. Her panicked efforts to burn documents and dispose of physical evidence were observed by federal agents who had placed the family under continuous surveillance. These actions provided prosecutors with evidence of obstruction of justice while demonstrating consciousness of guilt that undermined any claims of innocence. By spring of 1881, federal investigators had assembled overwhelming evidence against all family members while securing cooperation from multiple witnesses and former associates. The systematic nature of their investigation had overcome every defensive measure the Whitworth family had developed during their years of successful operations. Their reign of terror was finally approaching its end through the methodical application of federal law enforcement capabilities that the family had never encountered and could not defeat through their traditional methods of corruption and violence. The summer of 1881 brought desperate times for the Whitworth family as federal investigators tightened their grip and former allies abandoned them to save themselves. Dr. Edmund Whitworth realized that his family's carefully constructed facade was crumbling beyond repair, but his arrogance and desperation drove him to attempt increasingly dangerous schemes to escape justice. The physician who had methodically murdered dozens of innocent victims now faced the terrifying prospect of public exposure and execution, motivating him to take risks that would ultimately seal his family's doom. The family's first major miscalculation involved an attempt to eliminate Marshall Harrison through a staged accident that would appear to result from the dangerous roads surrounding Millbrook. Thomas had been assigned to orchestrate the marshal's death during a planned visit to examine additional evidence at the family's laboratory complex. However, federal security protocols that the family had not anticipated protected Harrison from their assassination attempt, while their suspicious behavior during the incident confirmed his suspicions about their willingness to commit violence against law enforcement officials. Dr. Whitworth's attempts to manipulate public opinion through his medical reputation backfired spectacularly when several prominent physicians came forward with their own suspicions about his research methods and patient outcomes. These medical colleagues had previously remained silent about their concerns, but federal investigation provided them with protection and motivation to share information about disturbing patterns they had observed in Dr. Whitworth's practice. Their testimony provided expert validation of federal allegations while destroying the physician's professional credibility. Margaret Whitworth's charitable network turned against the family when former associates realized the true purpose behind her detailed record-keeping and victim identification activities. Women who had worked closely with Margaret for years came forward with information about her suspicious interest in vulnerable community members and her practice of gathering personal information that seemed unnecessary for legitimate charitable work. These revelations transformed Margaret from respected community leader into suspected accomplice in systematic murder. The family's most catastrophic error involved their attempt to eliminate key witnesses who had provided testimony to federal investigators. Sarah was assigned to poison several orphan children who had witnessed suspicious activities at the institution, but her crude attempts at victim elimination were detected by federal agents who had placed the orphanage under surveillance. Her arrest while attempting to murder potential witnesses provided investigators with direct evidence of ongoing criminal activity and consciousness of guilt. Thomas Whitworth's decision to flee Virginia represented the family's acknowledgement that their situation had become hopeless, but his escape attempt provided federal authorities with additional evidence of guilt while demonstrating the panic that had overtaken their criminal enterprise. His abandoned clinic in Cedar Falls contained extensive evidence that he had been too rushed to destroy properly, including surgical instruments, preservation chemicals, and correspondence with buyers that documented years of illegal body trafficking activities. Dr. Whitworth's final desperate gambit involved attempting to frame his former associate Dr. Mitchell for the crimes that federal investigators had attributed to the Whitworth family. This scheme required forging documents that would implicate Mitchell in body trafficking activities while providing alternative explanations for evidence found at the family's facilities. However, federal document experts easily identified these forgeries while Dr. Mitchell provided alibi evidence that completely disproved the allegations. The discovery of the family's emergency cache of evidence in a remote location provided federal investigators with the most damaging materials they had yet uncovered. This hidden repository contained detailed records of every victim, including names, dates of death, processing methods, and buyer information that documented the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Dr. Whitworth had maintained these records for business purposes, never anticipating that they would become the evidence that condemned his entire family. Margaret's attempt to negotiate immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony against her husband and children revealed the complete breakdown of family loyalty under federal pressure. Her willingness to betray family members demonstrated the desperation that had overcome their criminal organization, while her detailed knowledge of their operations provided prosecutors with insider information that filled crucial gaps in their evidence. However, her own extensive involvement in victim identification and selection made immunity impossible. The family's network of buyers and distributors began cooperating with federal authorities as they realized that continued association with the Whitworth enterprise would result in their own prosecution. Medical schools and private collectors provided detailed records of their transactions with the family, including specimen descriptions, payment amounts, and delivery methods that corroborated federal allegations about the commercial nature of their operations. This cooperation from business associates eliminated any remaining doubt about the family's guilt. Sarah's breakdown under interrogation provided federal investigators with emotional testimony about the psychological impact of growing up in a family dedicated to systematic murder. Her detailed descriptions of how she had been trained to identify and manipulate victims from childhood revealed the disturbing family dynamics that had enabled their criminal enterprise. Her cooperation provided insights into their operational methods while documenting the extent to which children had been indoctrinated into the family business. Dr. Whitworth's final act of defiance involved attempting to destroy his laboratory complex through arson, hoping to eliminate physical evidence that could be used against his family in court. However, federal agents had anticipated this possibility and prevented the destruction while arresting the physician in the act of attempted evidence tampering. This desperate action provided prosecutors with additional charges while demonstrating the lengths to which Dr. Whitworth would go to avoid accountability for his crimes. The arrest of the entire Whitworth family network in August 1881 marked the end of their 15-year reign of terror and the beginning of legal proceedings that would expose the full horror of their systematic murder enterprise. Federal investigators had assembled overwhelming evidence against all family members and their criminal associates, ensuring that justice would finally be served for the dozens of innocent victims whose lives had been destroyed by this family's insatiable greed and complete absence of human compassion. The final phase of the Whitworth investigation during the autumn of 1881 revealed evidence so horrifying that even experienced federal investigators struggled to comprehend the full scope of the family's systematic brutality. Marshall Harrison's team had uncovered what they described as the most comprehensive murder enterprise in American criminal history, with detailed documentation of 47 confirmed victims and strong evidence suggesting that the actual number exceeded 60 souls. The meticulous records that Dr. Whitworth had maintained for business purposes became the very evidence that would ensure his family's destruction. The most damning discovery occurred when federal investigators located the family's primary burial ground in a remote section of their property that had been concealed beneath what appeared to be a legitimate family cemetery. Advanced excavation techniques revealed multiple layers of human remains that had been systematically disposed of over nearly a decade. Medical examination of these remains provided forensic evidence of the processing methods the family had used, including surgical modifications that confirmed their body trafficking activities. This story has taken us deep into one of America's most disturbing family crimes, and if you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who appreciates the importance of remembering these forgotten victims. Share this video with friends who love true crime history and hit that like button to support our mission of bringing these buried stories to light. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we're approaching the dramatic conclusion of the Whitworth saga, and you won't want to miss how justice finally caught up with this murderous family. Dr. Whitworth's attempt to escape federal custody during transport to Richmond for trial demonstrated the lengths to which he would go to avoid facing justice for his crimes. The physician had bribed 2 deputy marshals to stage a prisoner transfer that would allow him to flee to Mexico, but federal security measures prevented the escape while providing additional evidence of his criminal intent. His willingness to risk everything in a desperate flight attempt confirmed his guilt while eliminating any remaining sympathy from potential supporters. Thomas Whitworth's capture in the mountains of West Virginia after 3 weeks as a fugitive revealed the extent of the family's criminal network and their preparations for potential exposure. Federal agents discovered that the younger physician had established multiple safe houses and hidden caches of money throughout the region, demonstrating long-term planning for emergency situations. His capture also led to the discovery of additional victims whose remains had been concealed in remote locations where Thomas had conducted independent operations. The interrogation of Margaret Whitworth provided investigators with the most detailed account of the family's operational methods and victim selection criteria. Her cooperation revealed that the family had maintained detailed psychological profiles of potential victims, including assessments of their social connections, financial resources, and likelihood of generating investigation if they disappeared. These records demonstrated a level of systematic planning that exceeded anything federal investigators had previously encountered in criminal enterprises. Sarah's testimony about her role in the family's operations provided disturbing insights into how children had been indoctrinated into systematic murder from an early age. Her detailed descriptions of training sessions where she learned to identify vulnerable victims and manipulate their emotions revealed the psychological mechanisms that had enabled the family's success. Her cooperation also exposed a network of affiliated operations in neighboring states where similar methods had been employed by associates trained by the Whitworth family. The discovery of the family's financial records revealed the extraordinary profits they had generated through their criminal activities, with detailed accounting that treated human lives as commercial commodities. Federal investigators calculated that the Whitworth enterprise had generated income equivalent to several $1 million in modern currency through body trafficking, property theft, and insurance fraud. These financial records provided additional evidence of premeditation while documenting the commercial scale of their operations. Dr. Whitworth's final desperate gambit involved attempting to claim that his activities represented legitimate medical research that had been misunderstood by federal investigators. He produced forged documents purporting to show authorization from medical institutions for his specimen collection activities, but expert analysis quickly revealed these materials to be fraudulent. His attempt to portray systematic murder as scientific research demonstrated the depths of his delusion and arrogance even when facing overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The testimony of surviving victims who had escaped the family's operations provided emotional impact that complemented the technical evidence assembled by federal investigators. Several individuals came forward with accounts of narrow escapes from the Whitworth medical practice, describing suspicious treatments and procedures that had made them flee before becoming victims. Their testimony provided human faces for the systematic horror that the family had inflicted on their community for over a decade. Margaret's revelation about the family's plans for expansion into other states demonstrated that their arrest had prevented an even greater tragedy. She testified that Dr. Whitworth had been negotiating with criminal associates in Tennessee and North Carolina to establish affiliated operations that would extend their enterprise throughout the Southeast. These expansion plans included training programs for new associates and standardized operational procedures that would have created a regional network of family murder enterprises. The examination of the family's correspondence with buyers throughout the country revealed the extensive market that existed for their products and the sophisticated distribution network they had established. Federal investigators identified over 30 medical schools, private collectors, and research institutions that had purchased specimens from the Whitworth family, often without asking detailed questions about their origins. This evidence demonstrated the broader complicity that had enabled their operations while providing federal prosecutors with additional cases to pursue. Thomas's confession during his final interrogation provided the most complete account of the family's evolution from opportunistic criminals to systematic murderers. He described how their success in Baltimore had convinced them that murder could be transformed into a profitable business enterprise, and how their relocation to Virginia had provided the perfect environment for expanding their operations. His testimony documented the psychological progression that had enabled ordinary people to become efficient killers motivated primarily by financial gain. The discovery of detailed victim profiles in Sarah's personal effects revealed the extent to which the family had studied and planned each murder. These documents included psychological assessments, financial evaluations, and risk analyses that treated potential victims as business opportunities rather than human beings. The clinical detachment evident in these records provided insights into the family's mindset while demonstrating the systematic nature of their approach to selecting and processing victims. Federal investigators' final report concluded that the Whitworth family had operated the most sophisticated murder enterprise in American criminal history, combining medical expertise, psychological manipulation, legal fraud, and political corruption into a system that had generated enormous profits while avoiding detection for over a decade. Their systematic approach to identifying, eliminating, and profiting from vulnerable victims had transformed murder from a crime of passion into a calculated business operation that treated human lives as commercial commodities to be harvested and sold for maximum profit. The trial of the Whitworth family began in Richmond during the spring of 1882. Drawing national attention as prosecutors presented evidence of what newspapers called the most systematic family murder enterprise in American history. Federal prosecutors had assembled over 3,000 pieces of evidence documenting 15 years of calculated brutality, including victim identification records, financial documents, correspondence with buyers, and physical remains that painted a horrifying picture of commercial murder conducted with scientific precision. The courtroom proceedings would expose not only the family's crimes but also the broader network of corruption and complicity that had enabled their operations. Dr. Edmund Whitworth entered the courtroom displaying the same arrogance that had characterized his criminal career, apparently believing that his medical reputation and courtroom performance could overcome the overwhelming evidence against him. His defense strategy involved portraying himself as a dedicated physician whose legitimate research activities had been misinterpreted by federal investigators lacking medical expertise. However, expert witnesses quickly demolished his claims by demonstrating that his supposed research had no scientific validity and served only to conceal systematic murder for profit. The prosecution's presentation of victim evidence created an emotional impact that resonated throughout the courtroom and captured national attention. Prosecutors methodically documented each confirmed victim, providing names, ages, circumstances of disappearance, and details of how they had been processed by the family's enterprise. The clinical precision with which these murders had been conducted shocked even experienced court officials, while the sheer number of victims demonstrated a level of systematic brutality that challenged comprehension. Thomas Whitworth's testimony as a prosecution witness provided the most damaging evidence against his father and revealed the disturbing family dynamics that had enabled their criminal enterprise. The younger physician described in detail how he had been trained from adolescence to view human life as a commercial commodity, learning surgical techniques specifically designed for processing victims rather than healing patients. His emotional detachment while describing these activities demonstrated the psychological damage that had resulted from his upbringing in a family dedicated to systematic murder. Margaret Whitworth's trial revealed the sophisticated intelligence network she had created through her charitable activities, exposing how community trust had been weaponized to identify and target vulnerable victims. Prosecutors presented evidence showing that her detailed records of family finances, personal relationships, and social connections had been used systematically to select individuals whose disappearances would generate minimal investigation. Her transformation from respected charitable leader to calculated accomplice in mass murder illustrated how respectability could conceal the most heinous crimes. Sarah's prosecution as an adult despite her youth at the time of many crimes sparked national debate about criminal responsibility and family influence on developing minds. Her testimony revealed how she had been systematically trained to manipulate vulnerable children and adults, using her apparent innocence and charitable reputation to gain the trust of victims who never suspected her deadly intentions. The court struggled with balancing her culpability against the psychological manipulation she had endured throughout her formative years. The exposure of the family's network of corrupt officials created a secondary wave of prosecutions that demonstrated the broader institutional failure that had protected their operations. Sheriff Crane, Judge Mills, and numerous other local officials faced federal charges for their roles in covering up disappearances, falsifying documents, and accepting bribes to ignore evidence of criminal activity. These prosecutions revealed how systematic corruption had created an environment where mass murder could continue undetected for over a decade. Federal investigators' pursuit of the family's buyer network led to prosecutions of medical schools and private collectors who had purchased specimens without proper documentation or inquiry into their origins. These cases established important legal precedents regarding institutional responsibility for verifying the legality of human remains used in medical education and research. Several prominent medical institutions faced criminal charges and civil lawsuits that forced significant changes in how anatomical specimens were acquired and documented. The investigation of affiliated operations in neighboring states revealed that the Whitworth family had been part of a broader regional network of body trafficking enterprises that shared methods, markets, and victims. Federal agents uncovered evidence of similar operations in Tennessee, North Carolina, and Kentucky that had been established using training and techniques developed by the Whitworth family. These discoveries led to additional prosecutions while demonstrating that their crimes represented part of a larger pattern of systematic exploitation. Dr. Whitworth's conviction on 47 counts of murder, along with numerous charges related to fraud, corruption, and conspiracy, resulted in a death sentence that was carried out in December of 1882. His execution drew crowds of thousands who had followed the trial proceedings, representing public demand for justice after years of systematic victimization of vulnerable community members. The physician who had used his medical authority to prey upon those seeking healing died unrepentant, maintaining his innocence even as overwhelming evidence contradicted his claims. Thomas Whitworth received a life sentence after his cooperation with prosecutors was balanced against the horror of his crimes and his central role in the family's operations. His detailed testimony had been crucial in exposing the full scope of their enterprise, but his systematic participation in dozens of murders precluded any possibility of clemency. He would spend the remainder of his life in federal prison, becoming a case study for criminologists interested in understanding how family dynamics could produce efficient killers. Margaret Whitworth's sentence of 25 years reflected the court's recognition of her essential role in victim identification while acknowledging that her actual participation in murders had been limited. Her detailed intelligence network and systematic approach to identifying vulnerable victims had been crucial to the family's success, making her conviction on conspiracy charges inevitable despite her attempts to minimize her involvement. She died in federal prison in 1895, never having shown genuine remorse for her role in the systematic destruction of dozens of innocent lives. Sarah's sentence of 15 years in a federal reformatory reflected the court's consideration of her youth and the psychological manipulation she had endured, while still holding her accountable for her direct participation in multiple murders. Her case became a landmark in juvenile justice, establishing precedents for handling young defendants who had been systematically trained to commit serious crimes by family members. She was released in 1897 and disappeared from public records, presumably attempting to rebuild her life away from the infamy of her family name. The broader investigation that followed the Whitworth prosecutions led to significant reforms in medical practice oversight, death investigation procedures, and interstate commerce regulations that closed many of the loopholes that had enabled their criminal enterprise. Federal authorities established new requirements for documentation and verification of human specimens used in medical education, while state governments implemented improved systems for tracking missing persons and investigating unexplained deaths. These reforms represented society's determination to prevent future tragedies of similar scope and systematic nature. The aftermath of the Whitworth prosecutions reverberated throughout American society for decades, fundamentally changing how medical institutions, law enforcement agencies, and communities approached the protection of vulnerable populations. The systematic nature of the family's crimes had exposed critical weaknesses in oversight systems that had allowed mass murder to continue undetected for 15 years, forcing comprehensive reforms that would prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. The legacy of their victims would ultimately prove more powerful than the family's reign of terror, inspiring lasting changes that protected countless lives. The community of Millbrook struggled to comprehend how they had been deceived so completely by a family they had trusted and admired for over a decade. Town meetings held throughout 1883 and 1884 focused on understanding the warning signs that residents had missed and developing systems to prevent future exploitation of their community. Many residents reported feeling personal guilt for their failure to recognize the danger posed by the Whitworth family, despite the sophisticated deception that had fooled even experienced investigators for years. Federal investigation of medical institutions throughout the country revealed widespread acceptance of human specimens obtained through questionable means, leading to comprehensive reforms in how anatomical materials were acquired and documented. Medical schools were required to establish detailed provenance records for all specimens, while federal regulations created criminal penalties for institutions that failed to verify the legal acquisition of human remains used in education and research. These changes eliminated the profitable market that had motivated the Whitworth family's criminal enterprise. What do you think about this chilling investigation into one of America's most systematic family murder enterprises? The Whitworth story demonstrates how evil can hide behind respectability and how vulnerable populations need protection from those who would exploit their trust. Share your thoughts in the comments below about what lessons we can learn from this tragedy. If you've been captivated by this dark chapter of Virginia history, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into America's forgotten crimes. The psychological impact of the Whitworth crimes extended far beyond their immediate victims to affect entire communities that had trusted the family's charitable reputation. Mental health professionals of the era noted significant increases in anxiety and depression among residents of affected areas, particularly those who had personally interacted with family members or had loved ones who received treatment from Dr. Whitworth. The betrayal of trust represented by the family's crimes created lasting trauma that affected community social dynamics for generations. Memorial services held for the confirmed victims drew thousands of participants from throughout Virginia and neighboring states, representing society's need to honor those whose lives had been cut short by systematic greed and cruelty. These ceremonies provided closure for surviving family members while establishing permanent reminders of the importance of protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. Memorial gardens were established in Millbrook and other affected communities, creating spaces for reflection and remembrance. The legal precedents established through the Whitworth prosecutions influenced criminal law development for decades, particularly in areas related to conspiracy charges, interstate commerce violations, and institutional responsibility for criminal activities. Federal courts referenced the Whitworth case in numerous subsequent prosecutions involving systematic criminal enterprises, while legal scholars studied the case as an example of how organized crime could operate under cover of legitimate professional activities. The comprehensive documentation of their methods provided valuable insights for law enforcement training. Federal reforms implemented in response to the Whitworth crimes included establishment of improved missing persons reporting systems, enhanced interstate communication between law enforcement agencies, and standardized procedures for investigating unexplained deaths. These changes closed critical gaps in oversight that had allowed the family's operations to continue undetected while victims disappeared across multiple jurisdictions. The centralized database systems created in response to their crimes became models for modern law enforcement information sharing. The economic impact of the Whitworth scandal extended throughout Virginia's medical community as public trust in physicians declined significantly following exposure of Dr. Whitworth's crimes. Many legitimate medical practitioners reported decreased patient volume and increased scrutiny of their practices, forcing the medical profession to implement enhanced ethical standards and oversight procedures. Professional medical associations established new codes of conduct and peer review systems designed to identify practitioners who might be exploiting their positions. Historical analysis of the Whitworth case revealed patterns that helped law enforcement agencies identify similar criminal enterprises in other regions, leading to additional investigations and prosecutions throughout the 1880s and 1890s. The systematic documentation methods pioneered during their investigation became standard procedures for federal law enforcement, while the psychological profiles developed for the family members provided insights into criminal behavior that influenced early criminology research. The destruction of the Whitworth property following their convictions represented community determination to eliminate all traces of the family's criminal activities from their midst. The buildings where dozens of innocent victims had been murdered and processed were burned to the ground in a ceremony attended by hundreds of community members, while the land was consecrated as a memorial site. This symbolic cleansing provided psychological closure while ensuring that the physical locations of their crimes could never be used to glorify their activities. Educational initiatives developed in response to the Whitworth crimes included community programs designed to teach residents how to recognize warning signs of exploitation and abuse, particularly targeting protection of vulnerable populations such as orphan children, elderly residents, and individuals without strong social connections. These programs represented early examples of community-based crime prevention efforts that would become standard practices in the 20th century. The influence of the Whitworth case on subsequent criminal investigations demonstrated the importance of federal jurisdiction in prosecuting systematic criminal enterprises that crossed state boundaries. Their case established precedents for federal involvement in local crimes when patterns of activity suggested organized criminal operations beyond the capacity of local law enforcement. These precedents proved crucial in developing federal law enforcement capabilities that would be essential for combating organized crime in the modern era. Long-term studies of communities affected by the Whitworth crimes revealed lasting changes in social dynamics, including increased skepticism toward authority figures and enhanced protective attitudes toward vulnerable community members. Sociologists noted that affected communities developed stronger mutual support networks and more effective systems for monitoring the welfare of isolated residents. These social adaptations represented positive outcomes that emerged from the tragedy of systematic victimization. The Whitworth family's reign of terror ended with their prosecutions and the reforms that followed, but their legacy serves as a permanent reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting society's most vulnerable members from those who would exploit their trust and desperation. The 47 confirmed victims of their systematic cruelty achieved a form of posthumous justice through the lasting changes their deaths inspired, ensuring that future generations would be better protected from similar predators who might attempt to use professional authority and charitable reputation to conceal systematic murder for profit.